Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Thomas Grobicki, if I'm saying his name right. That looks really Polish there, Thomas.
Jak się masz? Yes, I
Ah,
am Polish, so through a lot of different channels, but yeah, absolutely.
so today we're going to be looking at the true ROI of using ColdFusion and why that ROI may be much higher. And ROI, just in case you didn't know, is return on investment. So it's how much value you get out of using ColdFusion versus other languages, and how you can make the business case for using ColdFusion, overcoming fears you might have about Adobe exiting the ColdFusion market, dealing with end of life cycle issues where features go away. And we have a couple of features we're going to talk about that have gone away and how Thomas dealt with that. And some horror stories he had migrating from CF10 to 11 a few years back. So welcome, Thomas.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to sharing my enthusiasm for ColdFusion.
Me too. We're here to help ColdFusion be more alive. So I think knowing that ColdFusion has a good ROI is important, because oftentimes, even if developers or CIOs want to use a technology, sometimes they have to show that it has a good ROI.
Right. Yeah. Again, I grew up. I've been doing software development for a long time, but Avalar and has been doing ColdFusion for the last 20 years. So our products are built on a ColdFusion basis. And, a lot of times people, I'm certainly evangelical about ColdFusion features and things like that. But the bottom line is as a business owner, you have to make the case for why using ColdFusion is better than other alternative environments. And certainly when you look at ROI factors like, people frequently bring up the cost of ColdFusion, and, something is free and ColdFusion costs money. But, I don't really ever judge things from that perspective. Yeah, it costs some money, but, programming time and server outages and other things that cost you customers and are a lot more expensive than the relatively low cost of a ColdFusion environment, even if you're an enterprise user. I know people oftentimes talk about enterprise and how expensive it is, but it's certainly not a factor when you look at the cost versus even if it saves you a small bit of time in developing your applications, and it saves you way more than a small bit of time. So that is certainly a big aspect of it. So yeah, so when we talk about ROI, I mean, we usually bring into bear product costs, lost opportunities, how quickly we can bring features to the market, how much effort it takes to build a application. You certainly have to look availability of resources. So, I have concerns about, ColdFusion developers and who's out there, but fortunately ColdFusion is easy enough to use that even if we have to train a new developer in it, it's somebody who knows web technologies and database technologies. ColdFusion is usually not the issue. And then you talk about, the cost of, things like outages and how easy it is to fix things. So even in upgrading your applications, which, a lot of people may find us scary, but we frequently will get, bug reports, and we have an automated bug tracking system that's built into our ColdFusion application that emails us whenever it encounters an issue. We frequently contact the customer that encountered that bug and let them know that we've already fixed it before they even know that the bug occurred. And, we have used some of the database technology features in ColdFusion to create self-healing databases. So when we upgrade, the system automatically updates the database that it's running on to bring new application features online, all while everybody else is running. We've got hundreds of thousands of people running on our server. The only time we ever take our servers down is when we've run our web servers for so long that basically Windows requires you to reboot about every 45 to 60 days. So there's counters that roll over or don't roll over well. So that's improved. I don't want to disparage Microsoft, but you know, you know, ColdFusion has proven to be a very robust and reliable environment. So that all goes into the ROI calculations, and certainly as a business owner, I have to make investments, and that's an important aspect of it.
So that's great, Thomas. Let's just dig down into each of those things you mentioned. The first one was save development time. You know, what do you want? Let's put a number on that. It isn't totally accurate, but
right. So I mean, so you know, people. Let's say a typical outage. Okay, so a typical outage. You know, I mean, we have customers that. I mean, you provide a you know, sort of a guarantee of reliability to the customers, and they're paying you money for running some kind of an environment, and if the environment is down, you know, you have to, you know, in some cases the contract says you refund money, so outages can cost you money. You know,
and even if they don't cost money, they cost your reputation and how much the
well,
customers
right.
trust you.
Right. So reputation, and like I said, you know, product reliability is a big factor, and we certainly sell ourselves as having a robust, strong environment that causes few outages, and we fix problems without, you know, taking the server down all the time. So you know, that is a big factor with our customers, and you know, we run lots of customers, and they all know us as having a highly reliable environment that, you know, rarely.
So what if you're okay sharing it, if you did have an outage for an hour or so, what roughly would that end up costing you?
Well, you know, I'm not sure I want to share that, but you know, so each customer has a different sort of, we have different refund policies, you know?
Yeah.
So we have an SLA that.
I mean, are we talking the cost of a car or the cost of a house?
Probably more the cost of a car, right? So
okay.
we
so
have
it's pretty important to you that it doesn't do that.
Yes. So we have guaranteed SLAs, and an SLA isn't that you refund them for the hour you're down. The SLA typically trigger things like you refund them for the day, or you refund them for the week, or you refund them for the month. And those are different negotiated points, right? So, you know, obviously some customers, you refund them for the month. That can be a big, if you have a long outage. I'm happy to say that we have typically experienced better than 99.8 uptime per month, which is outstanding. And that's not using any fancy, you know, technology in the, you know, hardware and things like that. That's simply running servers and you know, with ColdFusion applications, right? So we rarely go down. I mean, most of the time we go down because we have to go down to patch Windows as opposed to patching ColdFusion or anything like that. You know, certainly we have the outages due to the, you know, service releases for ColdFusion, but you know, those are few and far between and minimal. So.
So that sounds like the reliability of ColdFusion actually saves you a lot of money, and that's a big chunk of return on investment.
Absolutely.
For you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing too is, I mean, again, you look at how much a programmer costs you, and again, you're a programmer, I'm a programmer, we're all programmers, right? In the ColdFusion world, and you know, so programmers are expensive resources, and you know, there are things in ColdFusion that you just get. You know, web services. I got, you know, charting, you know, just even the ability to query aspects of the database, you know, migrating different database platforms, things that are, you know, cost money, even things like testing and the reliability of different releases of ColdFusion over different versions, those all cost money. You have to apply data, programmer resources to that. Like I said, we spent a lot of time in building the ColdFusion application, so it's robust, and it literally, anytime we get a ColdFusion error, I get an email message. All right. So that's what allows me to respond quickly. Obviously, if I was getting thousands of email messages a day, I would be unhappy, right?
Yeah.
And I don't. I get email messages related to mostly some sort of data flaw that, we didn't anticipate some issue. But, we have our programmers jump on those. And like I said, the message that says to the customer, by the way, you're having a problem with importing this data. We noticed it. If it's a flaw in our program, as opposed to a procedural flaw on their part, we've already updated the fix, so try it again. And let me tell you, customers are thrilled about that. No waiting days for something to happen. We're literally fix it and test it and have it up on the site, the same day.
That's great. So if we had to put a percentage on how much quicker it is to develop in ColdFusion than, say, Java or PHP or some of the other languages out there, let's just pull a number out of the hat and make a guess as to how much.
I honestly think our programmers are 50% more productive. Okay, so characterize it. We were .NET developers. We were C developers, C++. We've done development in PHP and Perl. We've done development in a lot of different languages. And just while I know each of those languages have their own diagnostic tools, just the fact that ColdFusion allows you to see where it's having a problem and report to you saves us so much effort. I've got to recreate the problem. We're able to run a ColdFusion application with its built-in diagnostics without trying to recreate problems and trying to guess what the customer was doing. We have all of that recorded at the time the flaw occurs. It's got strong exception mechanisms. It's got threading. It's got all kinds of features that just make it easier for us to gather our diagnostics and figure out what happened and fix it without going to the customer and going through a lot of back and forth and show me what you did and everything like that. We get literally our trouble tickets are emailed to us from the application telling us what's wrong.
So 50% savings on time of coding could be tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on your team size.
Right. Absolutely. Every problem is a programmer that has to spend time. If the programmer has to go reach the customer, schedule a time with the customer, it's just hours of I'd say dead programming time. I'd rather my programmers be focused on fixing the code or adding new features, as opposed to, not that we mind talking to our customers, but we like to talk to them about happy things, not how to fix a problem. So, so it's rare that we have to actually go back to our customers and consult them on an issue. We have besides the automated system, we of course have an online system where customers can report troubles, and it's rarely used. We don't often have customers actually going and manually reporting an issue. So.
And then you mentioned lost opportunity cost of delayed features to market. That's because it's quicker to program in ColdFusion?
Right. So, one of the nice things that we've been ColdFusion users since ColdFusion 1, right? And, we laugh about it, but, typically the new releases of ColdFusion have elements in them, as things like, report writing, integrating reports into applications, or, multi-threading, or web services, as those things came along, even now the support for HTML5, as web security started getting more and more important, each release of ColdFusion brought to bear solutions that if it wasn't in ColdFusion, we would have had to write those ourselves. And consequently, if you have to write applications, or even the component mechanism. I mean, again, one of the languages we were used to be big on was Ada, which had this notion of packaging, and that's a component in ColdFusion, and you can create components. So we created components for things like, the style of tables we want to use, and, the tab formatting. So a lot of our formatting elements are in components. And, we reuse those all the time. That accelerates our software development. Yes, and I know that there are frameworks. I know there are a variety of ColdFusion frameworks. I guess we wrote our own framework, because before there were all these frameworks that I know that people promote for ColdFusion, we wrote our own. So at this point, we don't feel like changing, but that just accelerates our development. And, so whenever we have to write a new feature, we have a ton of code that we just tap into, and, and typically we always are excited about new releases of ColdFusion and the kind of new set of toys that come with it that allows us to potentially release a new feature that would take us a long time to write from scratch. But there are, elements in there that, I'm still waiting for that cell phone interface. I know that there are blogs that tell you how to do it, but I need a cell phone interface if Adobe is listening. So, but anyway.
I'm sure they are listening. I was talking to some people at Adobe. In fact, I have an interview with Alicia from Adobe after this one. So,
okay.
But let's see if we can put a number on this lost opportunity cost. So, and just to explain to people listening, lost opportunity cost means that you might have had an opportunity. Maybe you had some more sales of your product, or you could have sold to more clients, but you didn't because you were delayed in developing the features.
Sure.
If you were using a different language.
Right.
So that, if depending on someone's size of market and how much they sell their product for, that could be tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, even millions of dollars, depending on how big your
right.
product is.
I characterize it in two ways, and because I mean, lost opportunities means you actually missed it because you didn't have a feature. And one of our normal approach to sales and marketing is to do tailored demos for the client. I mean, I obviously qualify them on all those things, but usually we listen to the problem that the client has, and we present them with our application. But rarely is an application a exact fit. There's usually some special case that they're trying to deal with. And it's so easy for us to stitch into place. We've written our menus and everything like that, so we could just drop a ColdFusion application or, page in, link it to our menu system, and demonstrate a new feature. And it's usually not the full-blown set of requirements, but sufficient that literally overnight or within a few days have a feature that we could demonstrate. I would say roughly half of our customers we've won, because after the fact, you never find this out if you don't win, but if you win, you say, well, what was the deciding thing? And the people will say, well, everybody gave us their canned demo, and you gave us a demo that showed that feature that we were dying to have running in your application. The reason we were able to put that feature in is you write it, you drop it into the site, and it's completely separate. So it's not like every other customer is impacted. And we're able to link to it from our ColdFusion application that's got a capability of adding pages to itself. And suddenly you can demonstrate features that are exactly what, in fact, we usually just demonstrate that one requirement. Because the bottom line is that they have a strong requirement, they want to see that one thing. So the lost opportunity would be if you couldn't demonstrate that, you're then competing against bigger, we're a small business, so you're competing against big companies that have got hundreds of developers. But if you can provide that perfectly tailored one requirement that they just haven't seen yet, they're attracted to you like flies to you know what. So anyway.
And I think that's a very common situation because, you know, my experience of working with off-the-shelf software is it only satisfies 80% of people's requirements. And usually there's customization that has to happen always for these things. So.
Right. And again, the beauty of ColdFusion is that if you've got, let's say, a Java app, and I know there are ways of writing Java so you can dynamically load things and that, but there's I know that we have some customers who we've used ColdFusion with .NET, and we're constantly restarting IIS to bring their .NET app in and, you know, doing strange stuff. We used to be .NET developers in the early days and VB.NET, and we were constantly restarting things. And so there's this hesitancy. They then have to keep separate servers that are dedicated to downtiming and things like that. Don't have to do that. I can demonstrate things on our demo servers. I don't have to take it down for other clients who are using the demo servers. I just drop it in, and it's there. The feature is there. So, and we've done major features. I mean, we're not talking about little minor things. We've done major features. You know, we had one client that insisted on having you know, a address field that then linked to a Google map overnight. Linked to Google Maps, wrote it, dropped it in overnight using, guess what, that Google map capability that's in ColdFusion. I think it came in 11. Maybe it's in 2016. I don't know. I live in so many different versions of ColdFusion. I don't remember sometimes where the feature popped up, but Google Maps is in there, and it's very easy to drop one in, right? So. Way cool. If you're doing mapping applications, ColdFusion is really cool.
It is cool. There's so many built-in things, and it works really well with other tools, other databases, other APIs.
Right.
So, so we've talked about you know, save development time, better reliability, you know, saving on SLA costs, saving on lost opportunity costs. Any other things that come into this ROI equation?
Well, you know, it's you know, it always comes down. I mean, you're always competing in this space. You know, we talked about, I mean, lost opportunity, time to market for features. I mean, it's if you can accelerate your development, because like the Google Map example is a perfect case. I mean, you know, writing you know, we've written a number of interfaces to Google Maps. Again, it's for different people, but you know, we've used, you know, even the capability of dynamically expanding queries and writing queries that you know, so we have standard tables that we use in our database, and a customer frequently has special capabilities. So we allow you to expand the tables. So basically every one of our ColdFusion pages that uses reads and writes to those tables dynamically can pull in the extra data that's specific to that customer in the product. And, you know, those are tough features to write in other languages. And believe me, we have some, we still maintain some legacy C++ code, which everybody says, oh no, C++ is modern, right? Well, it is modern. I mean, sure, but if you've got a body of code that you've written a long time ago, it's legacy. It doesn't matter what language you wrote it in, legacy C++. Ancient C++ is hard to maintain, you know, even though probably you could rewrite it all, you know, it's hard to maintain. Whereas we have code that we wrote back in CF1 days That sure, I'd love to rewrite it. If I had a bunch of programmers and a bunch of money, I'd rewrite it all, right? You know, it's always, you know, as a programmer and developer, you want to, you know, have the prettiest code possible, that's elegant and, you know, uses all the latest software technologies. But the bottom line is you can never afford to do that, right? So it's very important that old code continues to run and you don't have to go back and rewrite it all the time. We have old ColdFusion 1 code and ColdFusion 2 code and ColdFusion 3 code and lots of code written in various generations of ColdFusion that continues to run that we don't have to revisit. And we only revisit it if we say we have a major feature and we want to rewrite the whole thing because we want to improve on something in a huge way. But it's very important to have that capability of not going back and revisiting you know, your early days, you know.
So that's the backwards compatibility that most ColdFusion versions have for old code.
Right.
And let's see if we can put a number on that. I mean, have you seen that in other languages where there wasn't such good backwards compatibility and you had to do a lot of rewriting, or?
Well, you know, the thing is that, okay, so you know, I'll use the C++ as an example, okay? So C++ per se, I haven't looked at modern C++ in a while, so I may be saying stuff that's wrong for modern C++. C++ doesn't have the notion of threads built into it, right? Threads is a separate, there's you know, different environments have different kinds of threading technologies. And so if you're on Windows, you use one kind of threads. If you're on Unix, you use another kind. And you know, and there are libraries and there are frameworks and things like that, but those are all different things. And, you know, frequently one of the things that you fall into with things like PHP is there are lots of libraries that you tend to use. And you start using them and they're open source. So there are people developing them and you say, well, that's good. I could just grab this library and use it and it does some useful stuff, but there's also nobody controlling how that changes. So we have frequently had to revisit and redevelop older applications because suddenly the library that we used to use is no longer available, and our choice is to take over the maintenance of that particular thread of the library or update everything to use a new sequence, right? And that costs us. We've had that happen in just about every language. And, you know, again, we don't like taking over libraries and you know, that's happened a number of times, and that's a cost. I mean, again, anytime you don't have to maintain a library, it's good. And so when ColdFusion comes with support from HTML5 or some sort of web services, or they update because there's a new way of services, or they support, you know, integrating with .NET or any of those things, or even the upgrade to, which in our experience was useful, to using Tomcat as the underlying mechanism. That was useful because, again, you could do some Java things that you couldn't do before. So those are all enhancements that would cost you a lot of development times if you had to maintain it yourself. And again, programming time is money. So, you know, if I take a average developer, and I'm going to give a number here, which people are going to say, oh, that's way too high or that's way too low. But let's say your developer costs you $10,000 a month. And I'm factoring in, you know, benefits and in the United States and things like that. You know, yes, you could probably find ColdFusion developers for $1,000 a month if you look really hard. Maybe not, I don't know. And 20,000, you know, depending on a high cost area. But 10,000 is the number I use. How much does ColdFusion Enterprise cost?
Oh, about 7 or 8, right?
Yeah, 7 or 8. So less than a month's worth of time for a developer. So if even there's one feature in Enterprise that you use that saves you, let's say, a half a month of a developer's time, and it's, you know, there's trust me, that's not even half a month. I mean, when you take developing, talking about it, how are you going to do it? You know, ColdFusion Enterprise is nothing. Okay. Now, could you do that in PHP or .NET? Yeah, absolutely. But the bottom line is, you know, I've used those other environments, and it's just harder. Just plain out harder. You know, and people, of course, who are .NET developers. I mean, the problem with being the language is you tend to get a little bit evangelical. That's why I say go back to the ROI, right? Don't just take my word for it. Map out what it's costing you to do a feature and see if it's better to do it in some other languages. Of course, if you're not familiar with ColdFusion, you might say, well, we have to get all these programmers and all that other stuff. But there are plenty of consulting companies that do ColdFusion development. So I guess get one of those and have them help you, right? And you don't have to rewrite the whole application in ColdFusion. That's another kind of thing that people say, oh, we have to rewrite everything in ColdFusion. No, if ColdFusion is good at some feature that you don't have in your application, ColdFusion supports web services, web application, do web services, write it in ColdFusion and link it in there. We communicate with lots of applications that are not written in ColdFusion, and we get used by a lot of applications that are not written in ColdFusion. So, you know, don't.
Well, I think we've made a great business case for picking ColdFusion for application development here. And I added up all those savings that we had there from saving developer time, better reliability, avoiding lost opportunity costs by not having features ready, and, you know, the issues that you'd have with third-party libraries if you were using other languages. And the number I came up with is you're going to save 40 to 1.3 million, depending on the size of your team and how big the project is and what's being done with it. And, you know, I know these numbers are an estimate, but it's nothing compared to how much ColdFusion costs. I mean, ColdFusion Standard's just over $1,000. So even if I'm off by, you know, 50% on these numbers, you're still going to be way ahead by picking ColdFusion.
Absolutely. And even if you pick enterprise, but, you know, standard is, we use standard for a number of years, and in most of the cases we use standard for most of our clients. I mean, unless it's some very, you know, there are features of enterprise that are important, but you know, we tell people, you know, people say, what version to get? I just say, get enterprise. It's, you know, standard is good. And certainly if you got 500 or 1,000 people or something like that using your web server, you don't probably need more than standard. But, you know, we're running, you know, routinely 100,000 people a day. So, you know, it's on a, and until we had different servers, but we had some running standard again, and, you know, we kind of, you know, always are making the case. So for utility, but, you know, with enterprise, we don't have any trouble with that at all. It's robust, scalable, big environment.
Yeah, it's great. So let's look at some of the other concerns people bring up when they're looking at using ColdFusion. One of them is the availability of ColdFusion developers. How do you suggest people deal with that?
Well, you know, again, you know, there's an active ColdFusion consulting marketplace, so you could tap into that. I mean, it is difficult from the standpoint of attracting people to ColdFusion. So, you know, it's you know, if you use some environments, you're just going to have to train people, all right? But the thing is that I've taken developers who are not ColdFusion people, but as long as they are web and database technology people. So take for the moment ColdFusion out of the picture. So what do you need to know to write a web application? HTML, JavaScript, you need to know SQL, you need to know browser technologies, CSS. Okay, I've just mentioned 4 or 5 languages there that have nothing to do with ColdFusion, right? Now add ColdFusion into the picture, right? ColdFusion is the glue that stitches all that together. So yes, you have to learn the syntax of ColdFusion, all right? And you could hire a ColdFusion person, but I could take any scripting language developer, you know, so Java scripting language, PHP, Perl, Ruby, any of those. And I could have them be productive in ColdFusion in a week. Now, I'm not going to ask them to develop the trickiest ColdFusion, you know, framework, blah, 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 but I am going to say, hey, I've got a database here, I got a database table here, and I need for this page to do this. They could do that, you know. So people say, well, you know, I can't find developers. Well, teach them a little bit about ColdFusion. There's a lot of resources there. The documentation is great. There are good examples. You can find tons of code libraries online, you know. So you know, to me, that's a kind of a red herring. If you say you can't get, of course, one of our business lines is training people. So maybe I'm you know, don't mind investing in training. So yes, there's an investment there. But the bottom line is that there's ongoing investment in training in any language. So it's, you know, and you're still going to have all those other languages that I mentioned that are nothing to do with ColdFusion, right? And ColdFusion makes it easier for them to do those other things. So the bottom line is, trust me, I've struggled with writing queries in C++ and, you know, using frameworks for C++ and databases and using all kinds of libraries for PHP and databases. And, you know, it's tough, you know, so, and on top of that, you know, you do get people who are, oh, I use PHP, but I also use mod this and mod that, right? And so they come in and they've already used a bunch of libraries. So they come in and they're upset if they don't see their favorite library as your library. And, you know, so in some sense, you got a neutral platform because you know, you get a ColdFusion, you know, you train them in ColdFusion, they don't get upset that they don't have their favorite library from whatever environment they're coming from. So, anyway. So yeah,
I think it's more important the programming skills that someone has and the attitude they have than whatever the first language they happen to learn was.
Absolutely.
You know,
I mean, you know, and again, you know, it's sort of like an undergraduate. If you have the opportunity to go to college, an undergraduate, they usually have courses in languages and, you know, various programming. Here's a loop, here's this, and here's that. You go to graduate school in computer science, they say, we're using this language. They don't give you a training class in the language. They just assume that as a seasoned developer, you can learn the language in a week, right? Your first assignment is in some language you've never seen before, right? And believe me, I've had to do some squirrely languages. If you've ever had to use Lisp, I got a background in AI, Lisp, and some of the wilder AI languages. That's a tough language to learn.
It is a little unusual.
Actually, there's a language.
Yeah,
never mind.
Yeah. Another concern people sometimes have is fear that Adobe will exit the ColdFusion market. Let's talk about that a bit and how we can overcome that fear.
Well, I mean, you know, I know we have a lot of customers that use it, ColdFusion, and a lot of big government customers and things like that. So you know, Adobe maintains a lot of products. One would hope that they would look at that marketplace and sort of say they're still active people who like the technology and applications that are written to it. To some advantage, there are open source, or not open source, but things like Blue Dragon and other kind of ColdFusion-like environments, which again, have similar language elements. So, you know, my feeling is, I mean, you know, our applications are written in ColdFusion, and we've staked a lot of our, you know, company's, you know, future on that. But you know, that's a risk. I mean, that's a risk you have to evaluate. Like I said, we've been using ColdFusion for 20 years. I mean, I remember discussions back in early ColdFusion 1 days when people were saying, "Oh, Perl's going to take over the world." And then when PHP came along, it was PHP's taking over the world. And, you know, and then I think PHP is now owned by somebody, right? Somebody took over PHP. So there's a commercial company that does maintenance on PHP. And I think, you know, so then Ruby on Rails is, you know, it was going to take over the world. And, you know, so language evolve and things change and new languages come along. And, you know, Java is not, it's owned by a company, right? Oracle runs Java. So while I don't think Oracle is going to abandon Java, Oracle could change Java to its, you know, to its liking, and you know, it's their product, so they could do that, right? So I think, again, it's you know, you have to make that business case. But the bottom line is like any business case with any languages, you have to say, is it worth the risk, and sort of say they've been around and using it for a long time. And of course, the more people who promote it and use it and are interested in it, the more Adobe will say there's a vibrant market. So it's a focus on the market and getting people excited about using it. And that all comes down to the business case. The more likely the business case is, the better it is. And believe me, I would be I would be more unhappy if I had started using Perl way back when. And I mean, we made a decision to not use Perl and to use ColdFusion. I would be a lot more unhappy if we had made the decision to use Perl, because again, I don't hear as much about Perl these days as I used to. And so I don't know, maybe there's a big market for it. I don't know.
No, but there's still lots of sites written in it, and it's still used to write scripts.
Sure,
so,
sure. Again, but the question is if you picked Perl, like anything, if you picked the language. Well, I know there's one language that we were considering that I know that is completely almost off the market. It's gone away, and you know, so. Again, we've been using ColdFusion for 20 years. That's a long time, and you know, we hope to use it for another 20 years. Long past my development lifetime, so.
So some of the other things that occurred to me while we were talking as about, you know, why people can relax about Adobe staying in the ColdFusion market. I mean, they've got a roadmap for ColdFusion, and it extends out 10 years. That tends to suggest they're planning to stay in the market for at least 10 years, which in terms of web development, that's, I mean, web development years are like dog years, right?
Right.
That's got to be several lifetimes of technology development. And I'm not sure exactly how many developers they have on the ColdFusion development team, but I'm pretty sure it's over 50. Someone will probably correct me on the exact number, but they've got a bunch of people invested in this.
You know, I mean, you know, we judge, you know, part of the sort of judgment on, I know that there are, every time a new release comes out, there are these people who jump on it and say, oh, look at this situation, that must mean it's, you know, they're not investing in it. And we kind of view it kind of the opposite. We see features coming out in new versions that are improvements and show a level of investment that keeps us excited about using it and makes our lives easier. And you know, we like that. I mean, we like that somebody's thinking about what's this, what's coming down the pike for, again, web applications that talk to databases. That's the environment that we live in. We both license our product to people and ship it with a copy of ColdFusion or provide it in our cloud service. And we need a robust, scalable environment, and ColdFusion fits the bill. and I'm literally shipping ColdFusion to people who've never seen ColdFusion. We get it installed. I've never had a problem installing it on whatever cockamamie setup they provide me and getting my application working. I mean, that's the bottom line, is I can get a ColdFusion application running on old, Windows servers, other environments, Unix, Linux. We used to support all kinds of variants of Unix with ColdFusion. We don't do that so much anymore, but Linux and it just works, flat out works. And I can't imagine trying to get application. Well, we used to try to support with our C++ application. We used to try to support all of those, and we spent so much time trying to get it to run on all these different platforms and testing on all the platforms. And God, it was a nightmare.
I mean, the other things I would say to overcoming this fear is that, Adobe has the annual CF Summit, and that costs them a lot of money to put on in Las Vegas. I've done an event in Las Vegas. It is not cheap. And they also, next week, they're doing the Developer Week, which is a free online training they provide. And then outside Adobe, there's, I think if I counted them right, there's 6 ColdFusion conferences this year. So a lot of support out there.
Absolutely.
And I was talking to Charlie Earhart on the podcast the other day, and he said he'd heard from Adobe they're selling thousands of new CF licenses every quarter. That's not upgrades. That's people new to ColdFusion buying ColdFusion licenses.
Yeah.
And you've alluded to that a bit too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Charlie's a great guy.
He is a great guy. He's an amazing person, and does a lot for the ColdFusion community.
Absolutely.
And then the other 2 things that occurred to me are that, you've always got a plan B, which you mentioned earlier. There's open source ColdFusion. Lucy CFML is the leading one at the moment. So that's open source. That's always going to be there. That can't go away.
Right.
Open source software can never totally die.
Right. So, I mean, I've staked a lot on having ColdFusion available, and so I've made the business calculation, and, I'm not concerned. So, I mean, people frequently bring that up to me, and, and again, there are all kinds of myths around ColdFusion, and I usually quickly put those to bed, and I will put our application up against any product similar to ours that from scalability and performance and reliability, and so it's people. It's funny how people misunderstand ColdFusion. So it's
it is. Well, but we're here to help change that.
Yep.
So one of the other concerns that sometimes people bring up is that sometimes features go away, their end of life cycle features. And 2 we talked about earlier. One was the CF report builder and the changes in CF chart. Yeah. So let's just briefly talk about those.
Yeah, so yeah, one of the features, of course, we liked of ColdFusion was the fact that we rarely had to revisit things. In the migration from ColdFusion 10 to 11, they had changed the chart mechanism. It had to do with how you specified the some of the settings of variables. It's a completely different underlying mechanism. You could do the same thing, it's just you had to rewrite that. So that caused us a little bit. So to some extent, that if I had one message for Adobe is, be careful about things like that, or I know they warn people and about deprecating features or changing features, and the documentation is usually, good about that, but it would be useful. And, they have typically built into the server, they have this feature that warns you about incompatible elements or deprecated elements and things like that. Well, it'd be kind of nice if that feature would have a migrate those elements in there, which wouldn't be too terribly hard to do. I mean, we usually end up at least building a scanner to help us find and replace those, which is how we handle the charting mechanism. So again, that's of concern. They've added elements to enhance security, like, the encode for HTML and encode for JavaScript and things like that. Well, to some extent, I wish that maybe they would just build that into the outputting mechanism, CF output. It knows when it's outputting stuff, and it knows that it's outputting HTML. I mean, they could put something in there where you just say, encode stuff correctly. I know that that's not always feasible, but they have done elements for security, and security is becoming more and more important. So we, again, have worked to enhance the security of written tools to scan our software and things like that. And there are products that you can get that scan the byte code that gives you, some understanding of the security of your application. But security is big, so the more they could do. And I know they've done efforts in the editing product. I don't remember. We don't use their editor. What's the name of the ColdFusion Builder? Is that it? It's scans for security flaws. So, but and one of the big concerns we have, of course, is with CF report. And, I'm not. We've gone from Crystal reports to the ColdFusion report writer, and that's being deprecated. It still works, and it's still available for download, and you could use it. But the concern, we've invested heavily in report writing. Not, if it was just a question of here, you have to rewrite your reports, or here we're going to have to migrate to another tool. And I don't care if the tool costs money because of that, but we have customers who've learned to use the CF report writer and to write reports, because our product allows them to upload reports to the system that they want to run. And so, that of the deprecated features, that's a biggie. I hope that Adobe revisits that decision. And I understand, I'm not married to the CF report writer tool, and I understand that its technology that that was used to build that is dated, which is part of their motivation. But, I would love to see at least maybe a report writing tool that could generate CFR files. Now, if they don't want to do it, maybe they could release what's inside of those files, which are encrypted, and let somebody else maybe take a crack at writing a report writer that's compatible with that, or could at least help convert those files to some other technology. And again, most of what's in there is basically just, you take a query and you format it in some way. And so there are commands there to format. So it's probably HTML5-ish stuff, maybe some CSS, and embedded ColdFusion. That's essentially what the report writer allows you to do is take ColdFusion and put it into places in the report that makes, that you need, right? And so if you open that up and said, I'm going to take a CFR page and turn it into a CFM page and convert the formatting into HTML5, but you can't do that unless you can get into the guts of that. So, so their choice is, if they're not going to support the report writer, is to open that and make it available for other people. And I don't know what shape the report writer's in, but I'm sure there are companies that might be willing to take on the development activities on it if they don't want to do it. So.
And you said you had some trouble moving from ColdFusion 10 to 11. Was that because of these two features, or that was some other thing?
Yeah, so they, so in every release of ColdFusion, there are deprecated features, and deprecated features, they have I forget what they call each level, but they have a deprecated, so don't use it if you don't need to, but it's still going to work. Deprecated, we think it's going away soon. and deprecated, it no longer works, right? It doesn't stop working as in it breaks necessarily, but it just doesn't do what it was there for.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are relatively minor, some, they drop some particular form element or something like that. Again, I don't entirely understand. In some cases, the deprecated feature truly was awful and maybe caused a security problem and all that other stuff. But the bottom line is tread carefully in deprecating things. And if you do deprecate something, make sure your scanner suggests a alternative or a fix or something like that. Because again, some of the deprecated features seemed almost trivial in nature, but cause some heartburn. So again, their scanner is usually pretty good to highlight those, but like I said, we still have ColdFusion 1 code running. Thank goodness that, they haven't changed the syntax of a lot of ColdFusion up through 2016. So those things can still work, but that's where some of those deprecated features that stop working, do it. Or, and again, if you're new to ColdFusion, you probably won't use those deprecated features, but if you're old to ColdFusion, so it's mainly impacting customers who are longstanding customers. So Adobe, listen to us.
Well, I'm sure they will be listening. So let's change gears a bit, Thomas. And this is something I've been asking all the people on the show, which is, why are you proud to use ColdFusion?
Well, hey, listen, I'm proud to use ColdFusion. I built a successful company on ColdFusion. Okay, so I'm proud of the successful company part of that more than ColdFusion. But the bottom line is the ColdFusion enabled me to build an application that sells and sells well. Okay, so that alone, I built other companies on other languages, and those companies no longer exist. So, so again, if you sort of judge success by who brought you there, ColdFusion brought me here, okay? And having a company that sells a software product for 20 years and is thriving is a testament to the underlying technology. And I can tell you that while we use other languages, and I mentioned some of those, HTML, JavaScript, Java, blah, 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 the bulk of our products are written in ColdFusion. And so that's, makes me proud to use it. And like I said, I'm actually proud that, we were literally a ColdFusion 1 user. So it's, we have used it for a long time, back before Adobe owned it. So it's been through several generations of companies, and so it's an important aspect of our business. And it's I'm proud that it's enabled us to build a successful company. So,
well, congratulations on that. Now, sometimes, over the last 10 years, I've read people saying ColdFusion is dying, and it seems that, to misquote Shakespeare, the lady doth protest too much, because they keep saying it's dying, but it seems to be going on and actually getting better.
Right.
So, but the question I have for you here is, what would it take to make ColdFusion more alive this year?
I think that, that dying part is always levied in some technical criticism or something better. I mean, the bottom line is, I think that, part of it is just being a little bit more evangelical about it. I mean, you kind of get insulated and you're using ColdFusion. And I know I haven't been a big participant in the conferences. I mean, it's not just ColdFusion conferences. We just don't participate in conferences of any kind, right? You kind of get web marketing and things like that. So I think that Adobe, could do I think they do a great job of promoting ColdFusion, but I think that all of us who are in the ColdFusion community can make it, that much better. And I think the other thing is you need to go out and not reach developers per se. I mean, developers treat language like their religion, right? Or their framework like a religion. So you're not going to necessarily convert somebody who is a, hardcore .NET or Java or whatever reason, whatever language they picked for whatever reason. That's a religion. But you can make the case to business customers about why using ColdFusion is a great choice, why it's important to them. And I think that is something that as ColdFusion business people, we need to make that case stronger, is what's the, why is it a great platform for application development? Adobe needs to make that case better. Everybody uses ColdFusion in a context of business needs to make that better, and kind of promote the business angle, because I think that case is very strong compared to other environments. And again, everybody can make that discussion, but it shouldn't be that, ColdFusion is dying for these horrific reasons. No, I mean, the biggest one I see is people say, well, I can't get developers. I just told you I could get a ColdFusion person up and running in ColdFusion in a week. So that argument about developers is dead, right? That should be like an FAQ about why ColdFusion is a vibrant environment should be there. And, so maybe the answer is you hand people PHP and ColdFusion and you have some sort of a contest, with a problem. Solve this problem in the language, and, who does a better job of it at the end. I know they have those kinds of contests. And,
they do.
Pit the ColdFusion team against the PHP versus Perl. By the way, you can't bring your libraries or, something like that, because again, it's got to be the language, not the so that'd be actually
not the library that you pull up.
Yeah.
A hackathon. I think that's the word I was looking for.
Right. So again, that's just, it's, maybe that's a little silly, but you people, the other thing is, I mean, people do promote languages. Back in many days ago, I used to be an evangelical about the language Ada, which was a language being developed and standardized for use in embedded systems, which has to some extent gone away. It's still being used, but people, they kind of didn't market it. They didn't sell it. They kind of, wrote applications in it, but you got to go to young people and not grizzled veterans like me who kind of have scars to prove they've developed in 50 languages. But go to young people and say, hey, here's an alternative. Bring your interns in and say, here's a great language that you could use, and promote it that way. I mean, again, it's, you get old ColdFusion developers by providing it to young ColdFusion developers and promoting them to do that. So, and again, it's while I made the decision, I was the CTO who made the decision to use ColdFusion 20 years ago when I founded Avalar. It was before Avalar, really. It was a couple of years beforehand. But here I am 20 years later, still using it, and I've used literally 50 computer languages. I've used lots of bizarro languages that no longer exist, and I have to say that, and even though I'm a majority owner of the company, I still do development every day, and I love it. So And I've used a lot of other languages, including all the ones that other people, Perl, PHP, Ruby. I've used all of those. And I just prefer ColdFusion. It's better, easier, faster, and from a business perspective, I can make more money using it. So, that's that alone is justification for me. So, but I think we have to, as a community, kind of invest in younger people to expose them to ColdFusion, and they're gonna, you talk to programmers and coming out of school, and they're going to use whatever language is plopped down in front of them. So let's plop ColdFusion down in front of them and make them happy to do it, and show them that there's a path forward. And above all, probably one of the concerns I hear, when they say, oh, well, it's, because of course they're going to find, if you do a search online, you're going to find what you just said. ColdFusion has been dying for the last 10 years. They get those, what are the top 10 languages? What are the languages that are dying? They can do those searches and find that. And they get concerned about, if I'm pegged in ColdFusion and I'm going to change job, that somebody's going to say, well, you're not a Java developer. And I say to them, look, there are all these other languages that you're going to be learning: SQL, HTML, HTML5, JavaScript, CSS. You're going to use Java in ColdFusion. You can use .NET. You can use tons of different things in ColdFusion. Web services, all of that stuff you use in ColdFusion. And if you're concerned, I'm not saying don't learn to use PHP or do some comparison and contrasting between PHP and ColdFusion. But the bottom line is that if you go to a company and they say, oh, you learned to use ColdFusion and, I can't use you on PHP, you probably don't want to work for that company, because they're too narrowly framed. They're not looking at the big picture themselves. Because if I get a great ColdFusion developer, if indeed I was a PHP thing, I would say, okay, I'll give you a week to get up to speed on PHP and come back to the office after taking these training courses and be a PHP developer. That's what I say about ColdFusion. I don't say take a year. I say take a week, right? If you're a software developer, you shouldn't have a problem transitioning to ColdFusion in less than a week. It's the bottom line. Because all these other technologies are there. That's not ColdFusion, okay? Mm-hmm. You shouldn't have a problem learning a loop as a loop, right? Yeah, in a loop. And on top of that, you've got a tool that helps you write all that stuff. So you shouldn't even have a problem with the syntax. And if you do, you've got this great debugger that tells you what you did wrong. So it's the bottom line is there's no excuse not to use ColdFusion. So.
Great. Well, thanks for being on the show, Thomas. If people wanted to find you online, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn, and just use my last name. I'm probably, well, there may be some other Grobicki's on LinkedIn, but I'm definitely one of the 3 or 4. And then our website, we have contact pages there, and you could reach me through those contact pages, and if you want to talk to me that way. So, it's certainly, that's a good way to reach me.
So that's at avalar.com. And we'll put those links in the show notes for the episode. So along with all the other resources and conferences and things we mentioned, and the notes I took on what the ROI actually is. So lots of details if you go to the TerraTech website and look at the show notes. Great. Anyway, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and use ColdFusion.
Indeed.
Okay, talk to you later.